to have Doug Norwood killed.
Larry Gray.
Larry Gray.
A former Green Beret in Vietnam, Larry Gray had seen the same soldier of fortune ad that first attracted Dean DeLuca. He hired Richard Savage to kill his wife's new boyfriend, Doug Norwood. The unsuccessful attempt to kill Doug Norwood here in Fayetteville was one of a number of bungled capers by the Savage gang, a record which might have been vaguely humorous if it hadn't been for the other incidents in which people died. In all, law enforcement officers say Savage and his hired guns were responsible for 3 killings, 5 bombings, and numerous attempted murders. The gun-for-hire violence spread all the way from Florida to Minnesota. All the jobs, including the 3 involving Dean DeLuca, had one thing in common. They were arranged through ads in Soldier of Fortune magazine.
We've been able to identify 5 separate ads that Larry Gray answered and hired killers out of.
Doug Norwood is suing the magazine for $2 million in compensation and damages to be set by a jury. The case goes to court next month.
We think that they had prior knowledge of the fact that the ads were leading to criminal activity.
While his former colleagues had found their way to jail in Arkansas, Dean DeLuca had hitchhiked north, finding his way to the highway which leads into southern Ontario. Within a few weeks of the shooting of Doug Norwood in Fayetteville, Dean DeLuca was back home in Canada. Months before, he had applied to join the Canadian Army, and upon his return, he went through 10 weeks of basic training before deciding that real life in the military just wasn't for him. Eventually, he drifted back to Toronto, got a job as a doorman in a downtown nightclub, lived in that rooming house across the street. He had almost put the events in Arkansas out of his mind. That is, until that night, last December.
There was a knock on the door. I went to answer it, and there was 4 gentlemen in suits and trench coats. And they said, are you Dean DeLuca? And I guess stupid me said yes. And they said, well, we have a warrant for your arrest. And I told them to come in. They went to my room, put me against the wall, asked me to stand there, because in my room I had military and police crests all over one wall, a .22 rifle, a small handheld crossbow, dummy grenades, sets of handcuffs, police military uniforms at the back, just stuff like that.
Did you realize, as you saw those people at your door, how much trouble you were in?
Well, it's really funny because it was like I knew what the situation was and I knew it was happening, but it didn't really stun me or faze me that I was going through all of it. And when I got to jail...
Why didn't it stun you or faze you?
I don't know.
Surely if you're an 18-year-old guy and you've been arrested for a murder conspiracy charge, that's got to be about the worst thing that can happen to you.
I don't know. I just figured, fine, I'm arrested. Let's just get it over with. I want to go back to my life.
Michael Jackson had told the authorities where to find DeLuca, and he was subsequently extradited to the U.S. The Canadian police turned him over to U.S. federal marshals at the border, and he was taken to jail in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Dean DeLuca depicts himself as a headstrong kid who left home at 16, sense of adventure, doing things he wasn't really prepared to cope with. Do you accept that characterization of him?
I think DeLuca was a person that showed up in the wrong place at the right time, but he obviously had the mindset to go along with these crimes, because to convince somebody to commit a murder for hire is about the most drastic thing a person can do.
What about those people, Dean, who will hear this story, this tangled story, and say that guy deserves what he gets? I mean, he, not once, but twice, before visiting Doug Norwood, willingly went along on trips to murder other people. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he got himself into. He had plenty of chance to escape and didn't, and now it's entirely his fault.
Well, I agree to a point. It is my fault. I went down there on my own will. I accepted the responsibility or the consequences that would go along with it. So, like I say, since I was one of those people who thought he knew it all, could do anything he wanted and nothing would ever happen. And obviously that didn't happen, and now I'm paying for it.
Earlier this year, Dean DeLuca pleaded guilty in Fayetteville to a charge of conspiracy to commit murder. He'll be sentenced shortly. Now 18, DeLuca expects to be back in Canada in a few years. But under Arkansas law, his victim, Doug Norwood, will have something to say about the sentence he receives.
I think Mr. DeLuca, being such a young man, there may be some kind of a chance for rehabilitation for him. He's only about 17 at the time. He's now 18 or 19. I think that Mr. DeLuca is going to have to be incarcerated for at least 20 years to satisfy my own self.
Though the men who tried to murder him are all in jail, Doug Norwood still fears for his life. He now carries a .357 Magnum revolver and a shotgun.
I'm extremely heavily armed. I fully intend, when the next incident happens, that, it's going to be the grand finale. Either they're going to get me or I'm going to get them. And if they send another amateur like DeLuca, I'm afraid they're going to send him home in a body bag.
The Fifth Estate will return.